Rio back on the show. We're going to talk about Yang. Probably can't help but talk about Trump and the GOP. But before we do that, let's warm it up.
There's no place to hide now that he's arrived. I'm saying he ain't playing now with this campaign. Bang, dang, it's in. Drew, come roll with the Yang Gang. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up. Yo, there's no place to hide now that he's arrived. I'm saying he ain't playing now with this campaign. Bang, dang, it's in. Drew, come roll with the Yang Gang.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Rio, what's going on? How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing pretty great, actually. Yeah. It's a little bit of a nail biter watching Yang's mayoral campaign, so I thought I would come on and we could pick each other's brains about what's going on with that.
Yeah, seriously. Last time you were on, he was kind of probably up by 10 plus points and looked like he was gonna sail on to win. And right now it seems like it's Adams versus Yang with Garcia kind of spiking.
Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised. I listened to 538's coverage of it the other day, and I was sort of surprised to see that they were characterizing the three front runners as the moderates, which I what's your take on that? I mean, is that true? Is that not true? To what extent? What does moderate even mean?
I think Yang defies the normal kind of boxes that you put people in. I mean, obviously UBI is not a traditional moderate position, and he has a lot of other kind of similar things to land value tax. I don't think you could classify him as like a Bloomberg moderate. However, he also is not a classic quote unquote ultra progressive to the extent that he is pushing hard for a Green New Deal or a federal jobs guarantee, or he's not like Bernie either. And I think they consider him moderate primarily because he is supportive of public-private partnerships, and that you don't often hear him talk about private enterprises as the cause of all of our problems. Of course, he believes that they should be taxed appropriately, but that, I guess, in New York makes you a moderate if you don't demonize corporations, right?
Well, and New York has a history of electing conservative Democrats as mayors, or moderate Democrats, or liberal Republicans as mayors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess in a way, I was actually kind of happy to see 538 describe Yang that way, because I think part of the reason why the media and the Democratic establishment have been reacting so strangely to Yang, if we can talk about that for a second, is because, as you said, it is difficult to pigeonhole him into the traditional spectrum, right? And I wonder if, it'll be interesting to see whether Yang wins, because, as you said, I mean, he had a 2-digit lead over this person in second place, and now that's disappeared, and now he's fighting it out with three front runners. But he had the most name recognition going in, so it kind of made sense that early on, before people really started paying attention, we kind of knew that it would go down a little bit. But it'll be interesting to see whether he pulls it off, because if he does, then people will be asking themselves, boy, what did this guy who came out of nowhere, who went from being a nobody to being the celebrity candidate to being mayor, what did he do? Right.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't pull it off, then of course it'll be, he didn't brand himself right. Progressives didn't like him because he wasn't socialist enough. The Democratic establishment didn't like him because he was too anti-establishment. And so, given that his ideas are a little bit heterodox in some ways, but in other ways are actually extremely cautious of conserving. I mean, I think Yang is motivated by wanting to preserve our institutions. So let's talk about the data for a second, Tom, but then maybe we can talk about how he might have branded himself differently, but I'm reluctant to say it would be better at this point because who knows how it's going to play out.
Yeah, I mean, the purple line here is Yang, and you can see end of February, he really peaked at around 35%, and right now he's kind of looks like just under 20. And that orange line is Garcia, and it's pretty clear that she got a nice bump after the New York Times endorsement, because I think there were probably a lot of undecideds that maybe, you know, like if you like Yang, you know, early, you don't kind of think it doesn't take months to consider Yang. So I would imagine the people who are for Yang, they came out right out of blocks pro Yang, and then all these undecided started to go to other folks, like a little bit of Adams, but it looks like a lot of Garcia. But then Adams, you know, he's the turquoise line. He's kind of holding on, and between the three of them, you know, this is where ranked choice voting will really kind of tell the tale. I guess we'll see how it works. But part of me worries a little bit for Yang in that he might be one of those candidates where you love him or you rank him low. I don't know what kind of person puts Yang as number 2. Like if you're gonna put him at number 2, you probably should just put him at number 1. Like, you know what I mean? Like he there aren't a lot of like lukewarm Yang people. So we'll see. I thought ranked choice would be to his advantage early on because I thought he's so likable and affable, but he's been positioned as this outsider, you know, neophyte with kind of crazy ideas that you either take a leap of faith with him or you kind of write him off completely. Whereas a Garcia, she's like a perfect number 2 candidate. She doesn't really, you know, she ran sanitation. So, you know, like she knows how to get stuff done. She doesn't take bold positions one way or another, really. And she's not quite as, like, she doesn't have a lot of the baggage that, let's say, Adams or Stringer do in terms of their personal activities. So she might do really well and be the number 2 for like all the other the long tail candidates and rack up over 50% at the end of the day. Who knows?
Yeah, well, they've done some polling where they ask people to rank the candidates, although we don't have a lot of experience doing that kind of polling. And I understand some of the bigger pollers were afraid to try because they don't want to get it catastrophically wrong in a very important election. So what do we know data-wise about how people rank people? Tom, you must know that.
Oh, you know, it's funny you asked. Let me pull up some data. Hold on. Share screen. Chrome. Here is the last survey done May 24th. And this is the top choice. Garcia gets 21%, Yang gets 16%, Adams gets 20%. But then the number 2 row is what percent of number 2 choices does each candidate get? And Garcia gets 23%. She gets more number 2 ranks than number 1 ranks, interestingly enough. Whereas Yang gets 17% and Adams gets 22%. So, you know, if you keep kind of going down the line and do the simulation, I think based on this poll, she would have gotten first, Adams would have gotten second, and Yang would have finished third. Yeah. So, I mean, that's one poll. It's one, and this is before the last debate. I think in the last debate, Yang showed a little feistiness to his credit. Garcia either strategically decided to just let everybody fight and not say much, or what, for either, you know, she did it because she wanted to, or because she just didn't feel, you know, like she had the opportunities to speak a lot. But she kind of let Adams and Yang kind of duke it out. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, I felt like Adams is, I when I read his resume when the campaign started, I was like, oh wow, this is an interesting dude. He's a former Republican, but he worked in the NYPD, but is trying to reform from the inside. He's a borough president. It's a pretty good story, in my opinion. Like, it's an interesting story. But when I watched the debate, I don't know, he kind of came across a little snarky, a little snide, a little bit like dickish. And I don't think that helped him. But we'll see. I guess we don't know what the latest polling post debate looks like.
Yeah, no, it looks like Garcia went into it having the momentum, and is kind of in the lead, but not clearly so. So yeah, maybe the debate will change things. So let's talk about if Yang wins, what do we think he did right in this race specifically? Or I guess actually, really, you can't talk about Yang's mayoral race without talking about his presidential run, because that was part of how he came in. So people, he entered the race with a lot of New Yorkers already knowing who he was. So I guess how he established his brand in the presidential race is also relevant.
And I have heard that as a pattern of campaigning where you have people running for president and they are a long shot, but they still do it to build up the name recognition, to have a shot at consideration for a cabinet role, and to build up the donor base and to get practice. And then you run in your state, or in this case, city, and you've got sort of training camp through the national campaign. So I would imagine if he wins, we'll look back and say, wow, running for president, building that national infrastructure, getting on CNN and getting like probably millions of dollars of free exposure that way. And then also, I think he's been pounding the pavement. I think he's, was really out on the streets, knocking on doors and doing events probably more actively than most of the other candidates, especially during the sort of lockdown period. I mean, I think he was still pretty much out, very out there. I would imagine those would be the three things we would say, that's part of why he won. Well, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Let me think for a second. I guess, like getting on CNN, that's a good example, right? I'm coming at this from the perspective of a lot of the Yang gang wants to blame Yang's loss if he loses on the media mistreating him and the establishment cutting him out. But I think that's a very nihilistic, pessimistic, cynical way of thinking. Even if there's some truth to it, it's not going to help you win next time, So I prefer to think of it like, all right, the media is going to do what it's going to do. The Democratic establishment's going to do what they're going to do. We can't really control that. So what we can control, if we're the Andrew Yang campaign, is what we do, how we brand our guy, how we put him in front of the media, how he interacts with the media, how he networks with the media, how he networks with Democratic establishment types, et cetera, right? How do you build those relationships rather than just saying, oh, it's not fair that you're not giving me the coverage that I want, which, by the way, reminds me a little bit of a guy named Donald Trump. I'm just going to say, you guys, cut it out. But so what could Yang have? What we're talking about, what he did well. I mean, I think that going on CNN it really upset a lot of the Yang gang, right? They didn't want him to do it. He was a sellout, blah, blah, blah. I think it was a very good move. I agree. I think endorsing Biden and signaling to the establishment that he's not that kind of anti-establishment populist, that he's a different kind of reformer. I think that was a good move. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that to the extent that he has done things to put himself on the right side of the media and the party, those were all good moves.
Yeah, the media thing is interesting. I love that he went on CNN, and that to me was a no-brainer. I will say that New York Times, 538, Morning Joe, a lot of the sort of establishment Democratic leaning media still does not take the man seriously.
Yeah.
And I think they think of him the way many of us might look at, say, Paperboy Prince. It's like, oh, that's an interesting guy. Not really a serious candidate. Won't really be, mayor. And I think they might look at Yang the same way. Oh, that's an interesting guy. Kind of crazy ideas. Won't really be mayor. And it's palpable. Like I remember when 538 was breaking down the primary, and they would just barely talk about Yang, but talk about other candidates who were polling well behind him. Morning Joe, when they interviewed him, they didn't have any research. They were just like, oh, how are you, you're giving away free money. It's such a gimmick. Mm-hmm. And so, and the New York Times as well, there was one piece where it was on they were talking about specifically about Yang, and they were saying, oh, he's famous for being on Joe Rogan because he said he's the opposite of Trump is an Asian man who likes math. And you're like, wow, the guy sits for
it didn't have anything to do with his 2-hour conversation about policy.
The guy literally talks for 2 hours about policy with follow-up and follow-up and follow-up. And the only thing you take from that whole thing is that the Asian man who doesn't like math kind of line. Mm-hmm. And so, I think there's a lot of people, not just in the media, but just voters who haven't done their homework on Yang.
Yeah.
And, it sucks, but it doesn't help that what he's known for is something that seems on its face, kind of incredulous, like what, free money? So, it's sort of like if you meet someone, if you hear about a movie and you're like, oh, well, that's the one with the guy that, whatever, raises goats or something. You're like, well, that's a dumb movie, but it might be like an award-winning independent film that has like amazing plot line and characters, but you just know it from like one minor detail. So yeah, that's my sense. I'm not happy with the media. I feel like, especially New York Times, like, I don't know what it is, but every time I read them mention him, it's definitely skeptical and bordering on dismissive. Like, oh, can you believe that Yang is in the lead? Like, what is going on? And it's like, no, why don't you write about why he's in the lead and what's going on? And it's similar, I will say, and I know that this could be taken out of context by his opponents, but just in the spirit of intellectual honesty, I do think Yang and Trump do have similarities, and they can't be put in boxes. You're like, oh, Trump, he's a Republican, but he's anti-trade. That's weird, And so, like, there's this cognitive
not anymore
dissonance.
though. He's remade the party and his image completely at this point.
Well, yeah, I'm talking about the Republican Party before Trump entered the scene.
Yeah.
So,
No,
like,
I get the comparison. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they just don't get it, that it's sort of like, oh, it's a vegetarian dish, but it has some kind of meat tasting things in it. It's like this Impossible Burger. They're like, what is that? Maybe Yang is the Impossible Burger.
Well, that's one of my pet peeves. It's like, if you either eat meat or don't, make up your mind. Like, vegetables are delicious.
Oh yeah, I had some eggplant the other day. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Eggplant's great. Boy. All right. So I agree, but I think the correct question we should be asking ourselves now that we're on to what did he do wrong, is that, right? I think that there's always going to be some people who aren't going to like you, right? There's going to be some people in the establishment who like you and some who don't. There's going to be some people in the media who like you and some don't. There's going to be some centrist or conservative leaning Democrats who like you and some who don't. And there's going to be some progressives who like you and who don't at the voter level, right? And so in the end, once again, what can you really control as a campaign? What can we learn from Andrew Yang? What did he do right? We covered some of that. What did he do wrong? I think some of the things that he did wrong are, Tom, you and I both come from like a small government kind of liberal Republican perspective. or what used to be before, before it turned into the nightmare that it is now, and which makes us much more like the establishment Democrats than anybody else in power right now. But there is actually one area, I think, which is almost, it's not even necessarily an intellectual disagreement or a policy disagreement per se. I think it's like an emotional disagreement. I think that the Democrats, being historically the party of big government, and such that even the more pro-trade and more public-private partnership people in the Democratic Party, they do kind of have this visceral emotional belief in government as a way to solve problems. And I wonder if Yang's approach, which is about really taking power away from the government in a way, is using the government to empower individuals, right? To reform a system that currently has a kind of paternalistic attitude toward the poor.
Yeah.
And that also is sure that it can spend middle-class money better than the middle class can. Like, oh, well, you're not going to save it. It's not like you're going to use it to pay for your kids' college. So we're going to take it from you because we know how to spend it better and it'll benefit you better. And so I guess what I'm saying is, in that context, what might Yang have been able to, how might he have been able to sell his policy ideas better? Because I think the Democratic establishment and the New York Times are a bit elitist and snobbish, which so am I. I don't judge them for that, like whatever, right? But they think that the average voter doesn't care about policy, and I think Yang is proving that they're wrong about that. I think the average voter cares more about policy than they realize, or at least enough of us do to make a guy go from nothing to doing quite well in the presidential primary, which was shocking, right? And now might be mayor. So I think that people do care about policy. I think they like long conversations about policy. So the question becomes, could he have sold instead? He did a pretty good job selling regular people on his ideas. What could he have done to sell elites in society better on his ideas? Because they're saying, look, this is working for us. I'm doing great. Why should we change it? If it ain't broke, why don't fix it?
Yeah, I think that is, the whole premise of basic income is that individuals are in a better position to decide how to allocate resources for their benefit than a central kind of government could. And that does challenge a lot of the dogma of the Democratic Party. And I just so I'm not sure that's a debate he wants to have right now.
That's a good point.
Because I think he's right, but do we have time to go through like, hey, because there's so many people who have a vested interest in the system as it is, and who all have the best intentions. But at the end of the day, like if you're in a current system, you have a natural aversion to change.
Yes.
And you've been raised and been told and believe that these large government programs are because you're trying to do good, and anybody that's opposed to it wants to screw the poor. So when someone comes over and says, hey, I'd like to try a different way, and it may involve less growth or reduction of the programs that you hold dear, the natural reaction is like what Stringer said to Yang, like, well, you're a Republican, And so I think it's a tough one. and there's no, it does surprise me that the Republican Party has not embraced basic income more, because it seems it's so aligned with the notion that people should have more freedom and the government is inherently inefficient at a lot of things. But it just hasn't taken any root in the Republican Party, even though a lot of Trump voters would dramatically benefit. Like if you're in West Virginia, or if you're in central Pennsylvania, and you're pissed because you see jobs going to New York and San Francisco and Chicago, and going to these like sort of very elite, high-paying fields, like you're not going to become a machine learning engineer by some freaking government program. Like that's not going to happen. I couldn't do it. I don't have it, And so UBI does, as we all know, like it introduces power and also it spurs kind of small businesses and gives people more options. But
Yeah,
so you would
you
think the
said
Trump community would, but I think the whole notion of like, oh, it's a handout, like really pisses people off.
I think that the GOP is not and probably never will be a party of free enterprise and capitalism ever again. I used to hope that it could be saved, but I have to say, after the president incited sedition and terrorism, and the party had every opportunity, that was the chance. If the GOP establishment wanted to break from Trumpism, that was their out. Who could judge them for it, really, other than Trump's most loyal base, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are so afraid of, 1/3 of 1/4 of the American electorate. Because that's all the people, like 25, 26%, 24% of people in the US are registered Republicans. About a third of them are hardcore Trump base. They're the people who helped him win the primary the first time around. And everybody else preferred somebody other than Trump the first time around, right?
Mm-hmm.
They voted for him because they're partisan and because Hillary Clinton was, whatever, whoever, child sex parlor, pizza, something or other, right? Whatever nonsense. But it was a vote against Clinton, not a vote for Trump. Trump didn't have very much support until the establishment decided, okay, we're going to defend this guy. We're going to go down he's a sinking ship, and we're going to tie ourselves to that ship, and we're going to sink or swim with Trump. So now that they've done that, no, I don't think so. I don't think you can be a party of capitalism dependent upon the votes of people in deindustrializing states. I think you need to be able to win in the states where money is being made to be a party of capitalism. So I think Yang is running in the right party. And I understand your point that he might not want to have that debate, but I think he needs to. If he loses this race, he might be done as a politician after that. People might not take him seriously anymore, right? And that doesn't mean UBI as an idea will go away necessarily. I'm sure he was never in it for himself. He's in it for the people. So he will continue to do that work and we'll continue to help him. I don't want to be a downer, but I'm saying like this is his opportunity to make a case for his ideas and why we should reform the Democratic Party's approach to governance. And I don't think you can avoid that conversation by just making it all about helping the poor, because the deeper intellectual argument for it is what we're talking about. And that is an idea that is a little bit heterodox, only because it goes against, as you put it, this dogma that the government always knows better than the average person. I think that conversation needs to be had, and I don't see why the New York mayor race isn't a place to do it. Maybe I'm wrong, but if he loses, I'm going to worry it's because he didn't brand his ideas properly.
Well, I watched a good chunk of the mayoral debate this week, and it's not a thoughtful policy exchange. It's
I don't necessarily mean debates, but yeah, I take your point. Yeah.
And the whole dialogue in the debate and even on the trail is they're not doing 2-hour sit down fireside chats about the pros and cons of basic income versus large government programs. They're talking about, oh, didn't you take your kids and wife to your other house in upstate New York during the pandemic? Or why did you call this a bodega when it's a small supermarket? Whatever. And
all of the Democratic elites all did the same thing. You know that, right? Of course they did. You're going to get out of the city during a pandemic if you can. You'd be crazy not to. Frankly, you'd be putting your family at risk if you can.
Yeah.
And also, you're reducing the risk of everybody else in the city by reducing the population. What's wrong with that?
Yeah. Well, that it's all reasonable. It does land harder with Yang because there already is this well, where's he really from? Is he really one of us? Yang's not like us. I think Adams said that he hasn't had a job like us. And then you wonder, who's us? And why are you saying like, what are you going to do next? Are you going to ask for a certified birth certificate? It's so sad. Maya Wiley was born in Washington, D.C. She wasn't even born in New York State. She went to school in New Hampshire. Nobody challenges whether she's a New Yorker, but Yang, born in upstate New York, lived in New York City for 25 years, went to Columbia University. Somehow he's not really one of us. And so, it's just there's that undercurrent of either conscious or subconscious or unconscious bias that I think comes with running for political office as a Asian American man. I don't think it's a character they've never seen before. It's just like, what?
Yeah,
Who's this guy?
I agree. I mean, but like, what does it really take to take him seriously? Like, imagine if he was a white guy running for mayor, who has been a successful businessman. He's run a great nonprofit that's done a lot of good. I don't think people would be as skeptical as him. I think you're right. Racism isn't only a problem in the GOP. It's just that the GOP is the place where it's acceptable to say it out loud right now, which is obviously disgusting. But yeah, I mean, it is a problem. It's 100% a problem. And the left has this weird idea about oppression and so forth that sees the Asian population as the model minority. Maybe it's because they exist as evidence against their argument that the only reason that anybody would ever fail is because the deck stacked against them, because Asian immigrants, including Yang and his family, struggled mightily, but they succeeded, right? That's the American dream. That's a story that Republicans would respond to better than Democrats. And I think you're right. I think that there is something about the Democratic Party's paternalism combined with the way that the model minority idea feeds into their racism that is a problem for him. There's nothing he can do about that. And I agree with you. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that there are a significant portion of Asian Americans living in poverty, and that you hear about the Yangs and folks that are doing well in the private sector, but there's a ton of Asian Americans who are struggling, and I think that whole model minority thing. There are examples of that plenty, but I think it also kind of covers up the fact that there are a lot of middle class, lower class, working class.
It's symptomatic of the fact that it's just toxic to think about people that way. You should, can we just go back to MLK's vision of judging people as individuals, please? Just because maybe a disproportionate number of people who happen to come from the same part of the world as you are more successful than average doesn't mean that you, as a struggling poor Asian person, deserve less concern. But that is the way that some people think. Yeah. And that's kind of messed up, isn't it?
Totally. Yeah. It's one thing that I think Yang could do, I'm not a huge fan of having the policy, like the deep policy philosophical debate right now with just a few weeks before.
I'm not suggesting you do it at this time. I'm saying like maybe we should rethink the way that we talk about UBI going forward, right? That maybe we need to start bringing in more of those establishment Democrat types and more of those liberal Republican types with a dialogue around UBI that makes it about more than just free money to poor people.
Agree. I also think that if he wins and he's able to implement a UBI pilot of the magnitude that he's talking about, and if it works, it will be a game changer. Yeah. Because right now people hear it and they're like, that could never. It's as if you said to someone, "Oh, imagine a world where you'll do your shopping on the internet and you'll put your credit card information into these web pages that you don't know who's running it." I remember like in the like mid 90s, people were like, well, that will never happen. People will never put a credit card information in the internet, or people will never buy. How can you buy shoes over the internet? Don't be ridiculous.
I know some older people who are still nervous about that.
Yeah. And well, there are.
I was telling my mom, I'm like, people buy houses over the internet. it's anyway.
Yeah.
You're more likely to get in trouble because some random person calls you on the phone.
Well, that's for darn sure. Yeah. So, it could be that if we have UBI working in a major city like New York and it's showing positive results, I mean, it'll go from that will never happen to, well, why don't we do that in Chicago? Or why don't we do that in LA? Or why don't we do that in Allentown, Pennsylvania?
Yeah, no, I think we agree. If Yang wins this, it certainly increases his odds of becoming president, and it certainly increases the odds that we get a national UBI. I think that's true. Yeah. I'm just saying, like, what could he have done to brand himself and his ideas differently from day one in order to possibly have done better? I'm coming at it from a perspective of, instead of blaming the institutions, which is a very dangerous kind of populist instinct that can be used to justify tearing institutions down, which is not a good thing, right? We have professional journalist class and standards of journalism for a reason, but there are people, including a lot of people in the Yang Gang, who distrust professional real journalists, but they will believe something that's written on some random blog by some nobody because it reinforces their preconceptions, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we need to be careful not to buy into that narrative. I'm not saying that the mainstream media is perfect, of course. I'm just going to say this. Fox News is part of the mainstream media, and they are pretty bad misinformation promoters. But, what's more productive for us is to say, look, the system works the way it works. How do we win within this context? And so I hope that the Humanity First movement can be realistic about learning lessons. I don't want to. I mean, like, it's entirely possible Yang could still win. Let's move to something more positive. What could he do? Actually, really quickly before we move to what could he do to turn this around, do you think the Israel-Palestine comments and subsequent dial back was a mistake or not?
Yeah, I think it was a mistake. I think they made a calculated risk and they miscalculated. I think they said, hey, we've got this chart where the purple line's going down.
Yeah.
Maybe they have some internal poll. I have no idea. I have no visibility into their internal operation. I'm just speculating. But I would imagine, hey, we've got some internal polling showing that the Jewish voters are concerned about how strong or pro-Israel you are. You need to make it clear that you understand their view. So just put out this tweet. It goes out, and I think they knew there would be some backlash. I think they misread what's happening within the U.S. and particularly within the Democratic Party, which is the whole pro-Israel equals you are not anti-Semitic. That model is falling apart. And I think people are starting to have a more nuanced view, which is I can think of Jewish Americans as equals, and I can acknowledge the incredible tragedy of the Holocaust, and also not be pro Netanyahu. I do not need to genuflect to the Likud party and bless everything they're doing in the occupied territories. And that's a more nuanced view that, like, wait a minute. And the Europeans have had a more balanced view for some time now. So I think they misread that. And that, I think Yang's tweet would have been fine 5 years ago. Because I think 5 years ago, people were like, oh, well, if you're pro-Israel, if you're pro-Netanyahu, pro-Likud, pro-anti-Palestine, then you're a good person. And I think now we're like, wait a minute, you could be a good person. Just because you're not for like the most conservative Israeli policies doesn't mean you're anti-Semitic. In fact, I mean, I find it amazing because I happen to know many Israelis who always ask me, like, why is America always supporting the Likud party? If you're pro-Israel, you need to understand that half of the Israelis hate Netanyahu.
Yeah.
And they want a two-state solution, and they feel like Israel needs to compromise and come up with a long-term sustainable path. So, but I think the typical American view is you just got to be pro-Israel, and pro-Israel equals pro-conservative party over there. But again, Rio, I do think this is one of those things where, yes, a good chunk of the Yang Gang loves policy nuance and details. I don't know if the average American voter really wants to get into the nuances of Israeli politics. I think the whole idea of good versus evil, there's a black and a white, and you go on the right side or the wrong side, that appeals to a lot of people. It works well in media. It allows you to paint your opponent as bad and evil and anti-American.
Which AOC did. I mean, he opened himself up to AOC saying that he supports killing babies.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's even worse than libertarian Trojan horse, I think, right? And I don't think we should underestimate how much that sort of thing could hurt him. And I know people are going to say I'm motivated to say this because I don't like the left wing of the Democratic Party one bit, but AOC is not a friend of the Yang Gang, guys. That is not something you say when you're somebody's ally. And it's just so hyperbolic and such utter bullshit. Like, of course he doesn't support killing babies. Give me a break.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, I think I'm kind of disappointed in AOC for saying these things. Because it to me, there's only two explanations. It's like she didn't do her homework and understand, the context, or she knows he's actually a good person, but she needs to kind of chop him off at the knees to try and help, Morales or someone else who aligns more with her tribe.
Well, I think it's because she actually is a socialist, right? People, actual socialists don't like social democrats, and actual socialists will support social democratic policy as a step toward full-on socialism. Real social democrats who believe that social democratic policy is the end goal, they don't much like socialists for that reason, right? So I think that, I think AOC is one of those people who we saw attacking Andrew Yang by saying his ideas are too good for capitalism and I want capitalism to fail, right? Like, we're either going to get socialism through the government or we're going to bring it about through accelerationism. And Yang's ideas are going to save capitalism in the way that FDR's ideas did. And we don't want that. We don't want that, right? This is late stage capitalism. We're not going to let him turn the clock back on the death of capitalism. I think that's what it's about. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think AOC and Yang fundamentally believes that it's fine for companies to thrive as long as they pay their share, and then part of that money can provide a economic floor for everyone. And I don't think AOC just, I mean, wasn't she opposed to Amazon putting an office in New York? I think they were talking.
So.
So I think she's just very skeptical and suspicious of corporations in general. And and definitely the notion of basic income, trading $1 for a government program to put into basic income, I think is a no-go for her. I think. Okay,
so we definitely outlined a pretty big faux pas of his. I mean, it's not really related to the being mayor of New York per se. Was he asked that in an interview, or did he just volunteer this opinion about foreign policy?
I think it was. I think
then it's an even bigger mistake, right? I think that's not great. That's not great. Okay, so Tom, what can he do to turn it around? He could still win this thing. Obviously, we all need to go out, and I'm going to put this on moving forward as well. So everybody go out, phone bank, donate money to Yang, give twice what you gave when he was running for president, because this time he has a real chance of winning, right? And if he becomes mayor, then Yang 2028 is entirely possible, right? And I know that feels like a long game, but you know what's longer is never getting a UBI. That's a lot longer. So volunteer for this guy, phone bank, text bank, and send him money for love of God. This is make it or break it, guys.
Yeah, I think we have a few weeks. It's going to be on June 22nd. I mean, that's just like 17 days from now. So it's about 2 weeks to turn things around. It's not like he's in last place. He's basically tied for first.
Yeah.
Now, I think I think I donated for the third time last week or a couple weeks ago, maybe about 10 days ago. And I gave till it I had to kind of think twice. I was like, oh my God, is my wife going to be pissed when she sees this on the
Does this mean we're going to have to eat out a little bit less for the next month?
It affected our travel planning. Let's put it that way. So, but my view was, if you believe in this man and you want him to have a long-term future, and you believe that he is the closest thing we have to getting basic income pilots at scale, then this next few weeks could be a game changer, and it might be a one-way door in that the loss in the presidential, and then what will be talked about as the loss of a huge lead in the mayoral will be difficult to recover from. It won't be impossible, but it'll set us back probably 10 years. So, I definitely would encourage everybody to donate and text bank, and we have the Nerds short link for donating, tinyurl.com/nerds-nyc in the banner below. And we're going to get Andrew on the show. He agreed to come on after. I think, understandably,
he's a little busy. Yeah,
he's a little busy. We don't have the big audience, and I think he knows I'm not just going to ask him like the obvious. Like, we're going to want to get into stuff, and who knows? I'm definitely not going to ask him about foreign policy. I would not do that to him. So, at any rate, so we'll see where that maybe I would ask about foreign policy. I don't know.
Maybe just like, do you regret making the comment? Like,
yeah. It would be. I would love off camera to be like, seriously, man. Like, how do we have a more nuanced approach to Israel? Because the current one is not working. Any rate. So I think the other thing I think will be crucial. And this is for all of the people who have friends and family who are Asian American in New York, who historically have not voted and not engaged. They need to turn out. And if they do, and they turn out in unusual numbers, he will win. If everybody acts as they are projected to in the polls, but the Asian American New York residents kind of come out twice as much as they usually do, which is not a lot. It could be a game changer. And as an Asian American, guys, like, we've never had an Asian American mayor of New York City. San Francisco has had an Asian American mayor. We're very proud of that. But most cities have not. Yeah. And let me show you one interesting statistic. And if you look at how representative Asian Americans are in politics versus in the population, they are the least represented group relative to their percent of the population. Latinx is also underrepresented. Whites are overrepresented.
And it's a small percentage of the population to begin with. So it's really,
so it's basically like no one elected is Asian American. Like, when was the last time you saw an Asian American dude in the Senate? I don't know. Yeah. It's wild. Maybe Hawaii or something. But so this is not only an opportunity for basic income. This is an opportunity for truly kind of more diverse and inclusive representation. This is an opportunity for probably one of the smartest, like, highest IQ people that I've seen run in a while.
Yeah.
and it's an opportunity to help our greatest city, our largest city in this country, recover in a way and come back stronger and better than ever. And then that leads us to lots of exciting things down the road if Yang chooses to try and play a bigger role nationally. So yeah, I think everybody should dig in. Like, as an example, I freaking do not, I'm an introvert. So the notion of phone banking, not pleasure for me, but I am going to do it this weekend, in addition to making content like this.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, man, if this bro loses, and I just wrote some checks and did some live streams, but I knew that phone banking and text banking could help.
Yeah.
And I didn't do it, I'll feel terrible. So I hope everybody listening, like, do what you can, even if it's just like an hour. Do what you can, because the next 17 days could change the course of history.
Yeah, they really could. They really, really could. And maybe this is an unfair question, but is there anything that Yang himself could do, or that his campaign could do, to turn things around this late in the game? Or is it just up to us at this point? I mean, because us stepping up is not optional, right?
Yeah.
You can't put it all on Yang. But I'm just wondering, what do you think? What do you think? Like, because, he might listen to this. What do we think he should do, if anything?
It's a great question. The first thing that came to my mind was he's being positioned as this sort of clownish figure that isn't really serious, that's kind of always joking about things. So I would love to see the next few weeks. I appreciate already that people will disagree with me, but I would like to see a more buttoned up, serious Yang. And because we all know that he's fun and he's spontaneous and he's got a great sense of humor, but that's for the undecideds or for the people not sure if they should put him number 2. I think he has to kind of convince them that this isn't like he's not the paperboy prince, an Asian paperboy prince. That's not him.
Well, think of it like if you're applying for a job with the level of responsibility and power that the mayor of New York has, would you go into a job interview cracking jokes, etc.? I mean, maybe a little bit. You would want to make people like you as a person, because people like to work with people who they like, right? But you would definitely be cautious about it, because like one of the problems with one of the reasons I think that the Democratic establishment and the media haven't responded better to him. Let's put it in perspective, though. I think overall it's gotten better.
It
started out really
way
bad,
better.
Really bad. Don Yang, right? Started out, you couldn't gotten worse.
They wouldn't even mention him.
Yeah, but part of the reason that they're responding the way they are is because we are in a moment where the culture wars define partisan politics in a big way. And Yang is a guy who has more of a traditionally liberal perspective on issues and is okay with, he still has a sense of humor, is I think how Bill Maher might put it, right? He hasn't allowed political correctness to completely castrate his sense of humor yet. And I think regular Americans like that. But again, would you make jokes that could, or laugh at jokes that could be perceived in that way, applying for that level of a job? Probably not. You would be really careful, So I don't get me wrong. I'm not implying that Yang's on the wrong side of the culture war. I think he's on the right side. I think he's just, he's an affable, nice, normal guy. He's really not that much of a politician, which is something that a lot of people respond well to in politics, and it's particularly in America. But yeah, no, I agree with you. That seems like something, I love that answer. I absolutely agree. Button up, show that you're serious, that you understand that this is a very serious job that involves a lot of decisions that are not as exciting as the stuff that we like to talk about, like UBI and so forth. That's just, that's just one thing. You got to keep the trains going on time, as they say.
Totally. The other thing I was hoping to do before the primary is I was hoping to get him on and go through the data behind sort of the state of New York City, look at the budget together and run through some pie charts and things like that. And I know any other channel, people would be like, what are you talking about this stuff? But that would be catnip for me. But also, I think show that, wow, this guy thinks deeply, and
Yeah.
he's a pretty analytical dude, and he's not just like, the Pied Piper throwing money around. But yeah, so I think I hate to say it, but maybe even if there's an event or two where he is wearing a tie, or he is sitting, talking to other serious looking people about serious problems, and he isn't just like, on a skateboard or shooting pictures of like amazing food, which I love as well. But I think now it's a time to really
why can't you be the kind of person who wears a tie when it's appropriate and also rides a skateboard? We know he is that person. So I think you're right. I think he needs to show us that serious side a bit more. And if you look at the way that he created this incredibly thoughtful platform for his presidential campaign, and he's done so as well running for mayor. I mean, this is a guy who thinks about systems and how they work and how to reform them so they work better. He would be a terrific mayor. But yeah, I think you just need to signal to people, the outside needs to show the seriousness that's inside him, because inside, I think he's a deeply serious person when it counts.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Rio, I know we're a little over our scheduled time, but it's been a fantastic conversation as always. Tell everybody a little bit about your podcast and how they can kind of stay in touch and follow you and learn more about what you're thinking going forward.
Sure. Yeah. You can subscribe to my podcast. It's movingforwardpod.com. We're on Apple and every place else. You can search for us on there as well. I'm kind of the every single episode host, but I have a cycle of recurring co-hosts who come on, including Tom. So we get a lot of different perspectives. The idea is to exemplify the diversity of the humanity first movement and ideological diversity in particular. So we get into some of the debates that people are afraid to have, like capitalism versus socialism and that sort of thing. We really get into it, but we do it in a way that's not about one side winning or crushing the other. It's about trying to find consensus and common ground. So that's where we're coming from there. Movingforwardpod.com.
Great. And you're on Twitter at Riopublican.
That's right.
Right on. Well, with that, we'll say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.